Narcissistic mom abandoned me as a teen for a BF who later left her. Now she wants to get back. Narcissistic mom abandoned me as a teen for her BF who later left her. Now she wants to get back in contact because she's lonely and mad because I'm keeping her far away from my fam. I, 25F, haven't been in touch with my mom for the last 5 years because she kicked me out when I was 20 to accommodate her new boyfriend. My mom's ex-boyfriend at the time, let's call him Rick, was a total gold digger, and he didn't even hide it. My mom had been going out with Rick for about 3 months before she brought him home, and like the idiot that she is, she didn't even bother telling him that she had a daughter before bringing him home. My mom is 50 now, and at the time, she had been nearly 45 but told everybody that she was not a day older than 40. It was a blatant lie, but she hid it well with fillers and Botox. I don't know exactly how old Rick was. He must have been in his early 30s or mid-30s, but not older than that. And he was a moderately attractive guy. But my mom is also pretty attractive for her age. So at first, I thought that they were a perfect match, but it was only until he opened his mouth and started talking about how great it was that my mom had so much money of her own. He said that he liked the fact that she was a strong, independent, rich woman, and that's what made him want to be with her. I know that's what he said, but our massive house, its spacious living room, and very obviously expensive decoration is probably what really made him want to be with my mother. It's no big secret that my mother was rich only because she had been left a lot of money by her parents. She was an heiress, and that's pretty much all that she was. She had no career of her own. So while the rich part might have been true, I couldn't see how he was strong or independent, because she hadn't had to do a single thing in her life. Her parents had built a company from scratch and made her rich, but after they passed away, the company went to her uncle, and he had been running ever since. She had absolutely nothing to do with how the company operated, and neither did she have any interest in learning how to run it because as long as she got the money that she was supposed to, she didn't care about anything else. She mostly had hobbies, but she never did anything with any passion or focus to turn it into a real career. And that goes for motherhood as well because I'm pretty sure that I was a hobby for her because she was just bored. And I know for a fact that had it not been for her boredom, I couldn't even have been born because she definitely would have terminated the pregnancy. So I'm kind of lucky that my mother is flighty and indecisive because that's actually what led to me being born. And I'm also lucky that my grandparents, unlike her, were decent people and raised me in her absence. My mom probably got bored of being pregnant midway and decided that she wasn't interested in being a mother. So after I was born, she pretty much left me at my grandparents' most of the time and would spend the majority of time partying or hanging out with her friends. No joke, as a child, I literally thought that my grandparents were my parents. I have no idea who my father is because my mom got pregnant after a one-night stand, and she didn't have any way to contact him, so she didn't. My grandparents, at least, were loving people and never made me feel the absence of my parents. I had never known my dad, and my mother had never allowed me to get to know her. So I basically only had my grandparents, and I was content with it for a while. But then my grandma passed away when I was in my junior year, and a couple of years later, my grandfather followed. I was heartbroken because I felt like I had lost the only people who care about me. But thankfully, I still had my uncle, and he did look out for me. Granted, he and I were never as close as I was to my grandparents, and we didn't even talk often, but he told me that he would be there for me, and he really lived up to it. I had never lived with my grandparents permanently. I had always lived with my mom, but I would visit them every weekend. My mom would barely even be at home most of the day, so I was okay with being alone at home after school because it gave me a lot of time to finish my homework and do whatever I wanted around the house. After my grandparents passed away, I moved to college, but I would come back home for at least one weekend every month and for the holidays. It was not because I wanted to stay in touch with my mother, but mostly because I wanted the comfort of my own home, and that was it. If anything, my mother's presence was something that I would have to put up with whenever I came back. My mom had stayed the same my entire life, a shallow and self-centered narcissist socialite who cared about very little in the world. That stayed the same throughout my life, so she was pretty predictable to me. She had had several boyfriends, but predictably enough, she could never make it last with any of them. Sometimes it was just them being insecure because she had an amazing social life and was constantly out with other people, and some of those people happened to be other men. And sometimes it was just because she got bored with them, and she dumped them without caring about their feelings. I had met several of her boyfriends, and every time they would break up, I would be able to hear all of the screaming and shouting from my room since it was just above the living room. And never had she ever tried to make anybody stay, because I guess she never cared enough about any of that. But the first time that I was unable to predict anything was when she started dating Rick. With him, everything was different, and it was crazy that she wasn't able to sniff out that he was a gold digger, because she was usually great at those things. I mentioned in the beginning that my mother had brought him home for the first time after dating him for 3 months, and it was the weekend. I happened to be there. So when Rick saw me and I greeted him out of politeness, he seemed to be really confused because he hadn't expected me. Only then did my mother tell him that she had a daughter, and he seemed really put off by that. But that was only for a second, and then he went back to his usual charming self, but I was able to see through him, and I could instantly tell that he was not interested in my mother. He was just here for the money, and he made it very obvious throughout dinner. He could just not stop talking about how great it was for him that he had managed to find such a beautiful and independent woman, and had even impressed her enough to get her to date him. I knew that he was trying to flatter her, and it was working. He put special emphasis on how rich my mother was because that seemed to impress him the most, and honestly, he could not have been more obvious if he tried. After we were done with dinner that day, my mother told me that she had invited him to stay with us for a couple of weeks because he had just been laid off at work and he needed a place to go before his landlord evicted him. And suddenly, it all made sense why he had been buttering her up so hard. He only needed a place to crash, and my mother was his meal ticket. I wanted to warn my mom, but I usually never commented on her relationships because I thought she knew what she was doing also, because we didn't have that sort of equation when I could talk to her comfortably about these things. I didn't say anything because I wanted to give Rick the benefit of the doubt, not knowing that this decision would end up backfiring really badly. A couple of weeks passed, and I didn't go back home until the next month. My mother and I didn't stay in touch when I was at college, so I had no idea how things with her and Rick were going. But when I came back home the next month, I realized that Rick had pretty much made my mother's house his home and had turned the place into a total bachelor pad, and my mother didn't even seem to have a problem with that. Everything was a mess, but my mom told me that there is no reason to worry because the housekeeper would have everything cleaned up by the next morning. And it was fair, but my mother had always been a bit of a neat freak. It was surprising that she was allowing all of this, but I didn't say anything about it because, yet again, I didn't think that it was my place to comment on it. Rick and I didn't have any interactions throughout the weekend, and I barely even left my room. Just like every other weekend before that, I only came back home for 2 days, and I had no intention of speaking to anybody at the time. So I stayed out of everybody's way and just minded my own business. The only time I would even go downstairs would be for meals, and even then, I would just take my food and go back to my room so I could eat by myself. Let me just make it very clear that throughout that weekend, I hadn't even spoken to Rick. But for some reason, he still had a problem with it and didn't like the fact that I had come back home. So the day that I was supposed to leave, my mother came into my room and told me that she wanted to talk to me about something important. That was surprising because usually my mother and I have nothing to talk about. So I knew it could only be bad news. And she told me that she would appreciate it if I didn't come back home after that month because apparently Rick didn't feel comfortable having me around. He said that he just wanted to be the two of them, and I had completely ruined the vibe being there for the weekend. Apparently, he had believed that he and my mother had a nice rhythm going, and I had disrupted it by coming back home in the middle of the month. He just didn't get that bachelor vibe anymore and felt like he was being suffocated because it felt too much like a family, and he just wasn't ready for that yet. I could tell that he had been bluffing about all of it. He just wanted me out of the way and was coming up with weird excuses to accomplish that. It was extremely insulting because this was my home first, and he was the one who was ruining the vibe by being here and messing up the place. So I decided to ask my mom when he was going to leave because he was not supposed to stay here permanently. She had said that he would just live here for a couple of weeks until he was able to find a new job and get back on his feet. Unfortunately, that was not the right thing to say because my mom flared up and said that it was none of my business. She told me that it was her house and I was an adult, so I needed to clear out and stay away because she was serious about this guy and whatever he says goes. And if he wanted me to be gone, then she would make sure that that's what happened. I didn't even try to fight it because I knew that it was pointless. But I did tell my mother that Rick was nothing but a gold digger and she was going to regret kicking me out for him. She didn't seem to care and neither did I, so I packed my things and left that day. For the next couple of months until Christmas, I didn't go back home because clearly that was not my home anymore. But when Christmas rolled around and the winter break started, students were not allowed to live on campus anymore, so I decided to talk to my uncle instead. We had kept in touch, but we were not close, so it was really awkward for me to ask him for help, but the dorms were closing for winter break and I needed someplace to stay. My grandparents had made sure that I had a college fund set aside for me, so all that was taken care of, but they hadn't anticipated this. So when I called my uncle, he told me that I could live with him and his family for a while. I was really grateful to him and always will be for opening up his home to me and making me feel like a part of his family. We connected, and he also told me that the reason he had never tried to build a relationship with me was because of my mother. The two of them didn't have a great equation growing up, and he felt weird trying to talk to me or make me a part of his family because he felt like that would offend his sister or something. And he just didn't want the drama, so as long as I was taken care of, he decided that he was going to stay out of the way. But now that his sister had kicked me out, he had to get involved because he couldn't allow me to be homeless or something. We had a real heart-to-heart conversation, and yes, since then he's been my only family. His wife is the sweetest woman I've ever known after my grandmother, and his kids are basically the brothers that I never had. After that particular Christmas, I started spending a lot of time with my uncle's family and basically became a part of it. After I graduated from college, I needed a place to live for a bit until I found a job and had money of my own. And that's the time that I found out that my mother and Rick had broken up shortly after she kicked me out. I didn't know the exact reason why, but most people said that it was because Rick had been cheating on her with another woman. It was ironic because she had kicked me out so she could live a different sort of lifestyle with Rick, but as it turned out, all that had been for nothing eventually. However, my mother is an egoistic narcissist, so she obviously didn't reach out to me to apologize after the breakup. And I'm glad that she didn't because I had nothing to say to her anyway. We were done here. After that point, my uncle and his family were the only family that I had. I never had needed my mother before when my grandparents were alive. And now that I had my uncle, I didn't need her anyway. Years have passed since then, and I have not been in touch with my mother for a really long time. And a lot of things have changed for me as well because now I'm married and have a child of my own. 2 years ago, I met my husband, John, 27M, at this job that I was working after graduation. It was supposed to be a short stint, and I didn't think that John and I would end up together, but here we are, 2 years later with our daughter. My daughter was born just 3 months ago, and I already love her more than anybody else. She is the joy of our life and makes it all better. And that's why I made the grave mistake of posting about it on social media. Throughout my pregnancy, I kept it all quiet and nobody apart from John, my uncle, and a few of my close friends knew about it. I had never been too big on social media anyway, because I'm a strong believer in the evil, but after my daughter was born, I just couldn't help myself and I felt like I had to announce it to the world. That turned out to be a mistake because that's how my mother found out that I was pregnant. I had already given birth and finally reached out to me after 5 years of not being in touch. This happened last week and I had mixed feelings about it, honestly. She reached out to me through an email and told me that a couple of my family members had told her about the baby, and she said that she was desperate to meet her granddaughter. It was a long email, and the first thing that I did was check if she had apologized to me at any point. But unfortunately, she hadn't. It was pretty true to character and on brand for her to harp on and on about how difficult life had been for her after her breakup with Rick and how she still has trust issues from that terribly toxic relationship. She talked about how lonely life had become for her because now everybody that she used to be friends with earlier had families of their own, and even if they didn't have a family, they had other hobbies and work to keep them busy, but that's not how she had lived her life, and it was difficult for her to get used to this stage. She complained about how lonely she was all the time because she didn't have any family to talk to ever since I left, and her friends were all too busy for her all the time. So now she wanted to fix things with me, and I don't know, get back in touch. She said that she was sick of spending every day alone, and she was getting older, so she just couldn't do this anymore. She needed me to accept her back into the family again. That email, while it was sad, did nothing to melt me because I had decided that she was not going to be my mother a really long time ago. Pretty much that day that she kicked me out for her boyfriend. And yes, it was upsetting that she was sad and lonely now. But I did know it to her to make her feel like she was part of a family again. She had had her entire life, 25 years, to make me feel like I was a part of her family, and I was really her daughter, but she didn't do it. She was always too busy with her own life, and now I'm busy with mine. She never treated me like her daughter, so now I'm not obligated to treat her like my mother. It's as simple as that, and that email was infuriating. Not even once did she think it was necessary for her to apologize for what she did. It was ridiculous that she had written one whole page about how she was suffering, but she hadn't even spared a thought about how difficult it must have been for me to have a mother who didn't care about me. Yes, I was lucky that I had grandparents who loved me and an uncle who was looking out for me, but that doesn't replace my mother's love. For years, as a child, I used to wonder why I was not good enough for my mom, and I tried everything to win her over. I didn't give up until I was in middle school, and I finally realized that was not a problem. It was a she problem. But the years before that, I would never get them back, and I would never stop wondering why she ever even had me if she wasn't interested in being my mother. There was no apology for any of that, and I could still be okay with that. But she didn't even think it was necessary for her to apologize for what she did 5 years ago by kicking me out of her house. She knew that it would have been difficult for me, because I wasn't very close to my uncle at the time, and my grandparents were long gone. But she didn't seem to care about any of it. She only cared about her and Rick and their happiness. After reading that email, all the anger and frustration I had been allowing to build up inside of me just bubbled up to the surface, and I, instead of just ignoring the email, decided to respond to it. And let me just tell you guys, it was not a nice email that I wrote out to her. I called her all sorts of derogatory names, and I said that she was not even fit to be a part of society, let alone be a mother. I said that I would have rather preferred being an orphan than being born to somebody like her, who had no respect for herself or anybody else, and said that she had deserved Rick because, just like her, he was also shallow and stupid and selfish. It was a pity that the two narcissists didn't end up together, because they really should have. I said that I was never going to allow her to meet my family, because we might be related by blood, but I had nothing to do with her, and I wanted to keep it that way. I sent a very angry email without bothering to hold back. And of course, my mom was pretty shocked and upset because of it. Within a few hours of that email, I heard back from her, and she said exactly what I had thought just a few minutes after sending that email. She said that if I was that mad at her, then I shouldn't have responded to her email at all instead of saying that horrible things to her. She told me that she knew she had made a lot of mistakes as a mother, but this was her trying to make the situation better between us by reaching out to me after so many years and trying to be a part of her granddaughter's life. But if I didn't want that, I could have just said so instead of taking things so far and saying such horrible things to her. And honestly, I feel like a kind of jerk because of the things that I said, and it wasn't even as though I had used nice language in that email either. It had been a really nasty, curse-filled email, and I really regret sending it. I could tell from her response that she was very upset and angry, and I feel kind of bad because I know for a fact that she is really old and lonely now, and that email couldn't have been easy to receive. I feel like I owe her an apology, but at the same time, I don't want her to get the wrong idea. So Ida for sending my estranged mother a rude email after she reached out to me after my daughter was born but didn't apologize. Update 1. Hey, thank you so much guys for all the love that you guys have shown us. My daughter is doing great. Thank you for asking. John and I discussed the whole email with my mother, and we came to the conclusion that I do not owe her an apology. Maybe what I did was unnecessary, but it was not wrong. She had treated me like a stranger all my life, and now suddenly, since she was old and lonely, she wanted to play happy family with me because she had nobody else to turn to. None of that was fair, and what's worse is that she didn't even think that she needed to apologize to me first for what she did. So now she can sit and complain all that she wants, but it's not going to change the fact. She was a horrible mother, and I'm glad that I got rid of her. I don't think I would ever want to go back to being in touch with her, because even when I did live with her, it felt like I was living with a stranger. I never considered her my mother, so it would be really strange for me to introduce her to my daughter and call her grandma because that was right. That was a right reserved for family, and she was not family. She never had been. I also talked to my uncle and aunt about it, and they feel the same way. They told me that I had no reason to feel guilty because my mother pretty much brought this upon herself. She has been disconnected from her family her entire life, not just from me, but also from my uncle, and he thinks it's fair. I might have gone a little overboard with the email, but she shouldn't have expected anything else when she reached out to me 5 years after kicking me out of her house and then demanding to see my daughter. She didn't even bother to apologize, which is something that I will never forget or forgive. But anyway, I'm willing to let sleeping dogs lie and forget about the whole episode because I'm genuinely not interested in her drama right now. The only thing that I want to do is be there for the one person who actually needs me right now, my daughter. I can't do that if I'm engaging with my mother and trying to argue with her or trying to show her that she's wrong. It's pointless anyway, so she can continue to send me nasty emails. They're all going to spam anyway, and I won't even have to open them or read them. Update 2. So I don't know why, but my mother thought that it would be appropriate to pay me a visit just 2 weeks after I told her that I was not interested in making things right with her. I was at home today because I'm on maternity leave right now and John was out for work. So I didn't think much before opening the door when the bell rang, and unfortunately, I didn't check who was outside because it was around the time that John usually comes home from work, so I just assumed it must be him. However, it was not him, it was my mother. I'm guessing that she must have asked some stupid relative of mine for my address. And they, like idiots, revealed it to her without thinking about the consequences. But as soon as I saw that it was my mother, I mustered all the strength that I had and shut the door. She was taken by surprise because obviously she had expected me to let her in since it was rude to kick somebody out once you had already opened the door. But I didn't care about being civilized or polite. I just wanted her away from me, and I was going to do whatever it took to accomplish that. She started screaming at me from the other side once I had locked the door and went absolutely ballistic. I was about to call the cops already when she decided that it would be a good idea to throw a rock through my glass window. So she did that and immediately ran away. Thankfully, my daughter was in her nursery, and I was the only person near the door, but even I remained unscathed. The only thing that suffered, unfortunately, was my window. I called the cops immediately and pressed charges against her, so now I'm just waiting for this to blow over. She was not all happy and kept screaming at me about how unfair I was and how ungrateful I was, but honestly, I was just glad that nothing happened to John or my daughter. This was serious, and somebody could have gotten seriously hurt had they been at home. So John and I have decided that we're going to file for a restraining order against her, and we're going to have to act soon. We have also spoken to my uncle and told him about it so he can take the necessary actions as well and amp up security around his house. Update 3. Hi, everyone. So my mother got 6 months of community service and a huge fine that she had to pay for what she did. She also had to pay us for damages, and we were able to shell out quite a substantial amount of money from her. Honestly, if you ask me, she was only able to avoid any imprisonment because she is very well connected and her lawyer is a shark. But anyway, that's none of our business since we got the money and also the restraining order. So for now, we have nothing to worry about. John and I had been considering moving to a bigger house anyway, and we think we're finally going to do it. Now, it's just going to be me and my family. Wish us luck, you guys.